There's a moment in every person's life when they look in the mirror and quietly ask, how did I become this version of myself? It's not regret exactly. It's more like a faint ache, a whisper that says there's something more, something deeper, waiting to be uncovered. Most people silence that whisper with distraction, but a few decide to listen. And that single decision marks the beginning of self-transformation. Transformation doesn't begin with a plan or a vision board. It begins with discontent, the kind that sits behind your ribs, the kind that won't let you rest. It's the slow realization that the life you're living might not be fully yours, that the habits you built, the thoughts you repeat, the roles you play, may all be echoes of someone else's expectations. Psychologists have long known that the human mind prefers the familiar, even if the familiar hurts. We are creatures of habit, not because we love routine, but because routine feels safe. The brain's primary goal is survival, not happiness. It rewards us for predictability. But transformation is the opposite of predictability. It's a rebellion against the self you've been trained to maintain. Most people think transformation is about becoming someone new. It isn't. It's about unbecoming everything that isn't truly you. It's about peeling away layers that never belonged to you in the first place. Layers built from fear, approval, and survival strategies you adopted when you were too young to know you had a choice. When people say, I want to change, what they really mean is, I want to stop suffering from the version of myself that no longer fits. But change is brutal because it demands honesty. It asks you to see how your own thinking has kept you confined. It's not the external world that traps us. It's our attachment to the stories we tell about ourselves. In psychology, there's something known as cognitive dissonance. It's that discomfort we feel when reality contradicts the identity we've built. Most people will twist reality before they ever challenge their identity. That's why transformation requires courage. The courage to look at yourself and admit that some of what you've believed, even about who you are, might have been wrong. There's a fascinating study from the University of Stanford showing that identity-based beliefs are the hardest to change. When you think, I am this type of person, your brain will defend that belief like it's protecting your home. So if you've spent years believing you're unconfident, unlucky, or unworthy, your mind will subconsciously seek proof to keep that story alive. That's why transformation often feels like losing your mind, because in a way, you are. You're dismantling the mental architecture you've lived in for years. People rarely transform until they've suffered enough to question everything. Pain is often the first teacher. Not because pain itself is noble, but because it strips away illusions. When life stops fitting the way it used to, you're forced to grow. It's like the shell of a crab. It must break for the creature to expand. The same is true for us. But here's the paradox. Transformation doesn't happen when you try to change who you are. It happens when you understand who you've been. You cannot evolve out of something you refuse to understand. You must see it clearly, observe it, trace its origins, and then outgrow it. That's what makes self-transformation different from self-improvement. Improvement is cosmetic. Transformation is cellular. There's a psychological model called the stages of change. It starts with pre-contemplation, where you don't even realize you need change. Then contemplation, where you begin to question your patterns. Then preparation, action, and maintenance. But what this model misses is the emotional weight of identity death. The grieving that comes when you start letting go of the person you thought you had to be. Because that's what real transformation feels like. Grief. You're mourning the loss of an old self. I once heard someone say, the day you stop pretending is the day your real life begins. That's transformation in a sentence. Because so much of our personality isn't personality, it's protection. We learn to be agreeable to avoid rejection. We learn to stay quiet to feel safe. We learn to seek validation to feel seen. Over time, we forget those were adaptations, not truths. Transformation is remembering. The science behind it is profound. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, is what makes self-transformation biologically possible. Every thought you repeat strengthens a neural pathway. Every new experience builds a new one. When you choose to act differently, even in small ways, you're physically altering your brain. You're carving a new path in the forest of your mind. But repetition alone isn't enough. You must pair it with emotional intensity. That's why breakthroughs often come during emotional moments, because emotion is what tells your brain, this matters. Think about it. You don't remember every ordinary day from your childhood. You remember the ones filled with feeling, the joy, the fear, the love, the loss. Emotion cements memory. So when you attach emotion to new behaviors, your brain begins to prioritize them. That's how transformation becomes permanent, through emotional learning. But transformation isn't just mental, it's existential. It asks you to confront your deeper fears. Who am I without my past? Who am I if I stop being who I've always been? These questions are uncomfortable because they reveal something terrifying, that the self is not fixed, it's fluid, ever-changing. And if it can change, it means there's no final version of you to find. Only versions you create. Yet that realization is freeing, because it means you're never truly stuck. The person you are today is simply the story you've told the longest. You can tell a new one, you can write a new script, and you don't need to know the ending, you just need to begin. One of the biggest psychological traps people fall into is identity over attachment. They say, I'm just not that kind of person, and close the door on possibility. But identity is a collection of habits, not destiny. You weren't born confident or shy. You learned those patterns through repetition and reinforcement. The same way they were learned, they can be unlearned. A neuroscientist named Dr. Andrew Newberg studied what happens in the brain during deep self-reflection and meditation. He found that the part of the brain responsible for maintaining the sense of self, the parietal lobe, actually quiets down. The boundary between me and everything else begins to dissolve. That's why transformation often comes with a sense of spiritual awakening. You realize you were never separate from life. You were just seeing it through a narrow lens called me. But this awakening isn't dramatic. It's subtle. It's the moment you stop arguing with life. The moment you realize that growth isn't about adding, it's about subtracting, removing what's false, letting truth emerge on its own. You'll notice that people who've truly transformed speak differently. There's less noise, more presence. They don't rush to defend their opinions because they're not trying to protect a fragile identity. They listen more. They observe more. They understand that peace is not the absence of chaos. It's the ability to stay centered within it. And yet, transformation isn't linear. You'll stumble back into old patterns. You'll doubt yourself. You'll think you're regressing, but that's part of the process. The mind learns in spirals, not straight lines. You revisit old lessons with new awareness. The same pain will meet you again, but this time you'll respond differently. That's the proof of growth. The truth is, transformation is quiet. It's not the cinematic moment people imagine. It's not shouting, I've changed, from a mountaintop. It's the small moments, choosing patience instead of anger, choosing to speak your truth instead of staying silent, choosing to let go instead of control. Real change hides in the ordinary. But why do so many people resist transformation, even when they crave it? Because transformation threatens comfort, and comfort, psychologically, is safety. The unknown triggers the same fear circuits as physical danger. That's why you'll sabotage your own growth to stay in what's familiar. You'll call it stability, but really it's avoidance. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Self-transformation is that making conscious. It's realizing that what you've been calling fate was often just habit. And the moment you see that, everything changes. But seeing is not enough. You have to act. And that's where most people stop. Because transformation demands embodiment. You can't think your way into a new life. You must live your way into it. Every decision, every conversation, every small act of courage becomes part of the rewiring. You don't change by waiting for clarity. You gain clarity by acting differently. And here's something psychologists know but rarely say. Transformation often begins with discomfort disguised as boredom. That sense of restlessness you feel when everything looks fine on the outside, but feels empty on the inside. That's not depression, it's your potential knocking. It's your deeper self asking for expansion. You've outgrown your old identity, and your soul knows it. But before transformation feels like peace, it feels like chaos, because you're dismantling your inner order. Your old coping mechanisms will fight back. Your mind will say, go back. It was easier before, but easier doesn't mean better. It just means familiar. The storm is necessary. It's the space between the old self dying and the new self emerging. When you begin to awaken, you notice patterns everywhere. You start realizing that people react not to truth, but to their wounds. You see that you've done the same. And instead of blaming yourself, you start understanding. Compassion replaces judgment. That's one of the surest signs of transformation. You stop seeing life as something happening to you and start seeing it as something happening for you. What follows next is a kind of inner recalibration. You start building habits that align with who you want to become. You stop chasing intensity and start choosing consistency. You learn that transformation isn't a single event, it's a lifestyle. It's the daily choice to act from awareness rather than autopilot. And when you do that long enough, something shifts. You realize you don't need to chase happiness anymore. Happiness becomes a side effect of alignment. You no longer need the world to validate your worth because you've built it from within. That's the psychology of self-transformation. It's not a motivational slogan. It's the science of becoming conscious. It's about understanding how the mind clings to old narratives, how the body stores emotional memory, and how awareness over time dissolves those layers. You stop asking, how do I fix myself? And start asking, what's blocking my natural growth? Because growth is your default state. You just have to remove what's in the way. The strange thing about transformation is that it rarely feels like progress while it's happening. It feels like unraveling. You start to notice the cracks in your beliefs, the inconsistencies in your choices, and the quiet ways you've been betraying yourself. It's humbling, sometimes even humiliating, to realize how much of your old life was built on fear disguised as logic. But that humility is sacred. It's the soil where wisdom grows. Most people assume transformation is an upward path, like climbing a mountain. But in truth, it's a spiral staircase. You rise, then circle back to where you started, only to find you understand that same spot differently. The view hasn't changed, but you have. You begin to see that what you once called failure was actually feedback, that what you once resisted was preparing you, and that every setback was quietly sculpting the character required for the life you're now ready to live. There's something deeply psychological about that process. The human mind learns through contrast. It needs darkness to recognize light, confusion to appreciate clarity, pain to reveal peace. Each experience teaches the nervous system how to adapt, how to release, how to expand. That's why transformation often begins in discomfort, because that's where your growth edges live. Neuroscientists have found that when people engage in self-reflective thought, truly questioning their inner narratives, the brain activates a region called the anterior cingulate cortex. It's the same area involved in error detection. Essentially, your brain flags your old beliefs as outdated software. That's what those aha moments really are. Your brain realizing it's time to update. Transformation is not mystical, it's neurological renewal. But insight alone doesn't change behavior. Action does. The most dangerous comfort zone is not the one that's painful, it's the one that's almost good enough. That's where potential goes to sleep. People stay in unfulfilling jobs, lukewarm relationships, uninspired routines, not because they're content, but because they've normalized mediocrity. Self-transformation requires you to disrupt that comfort, to ask uncomfortable questions like, if I met myself today, would I be inspired by who I've become? It's a confronting question. Most people avoid it because deep down, they know the answer. But confrontation with truth is liberation. The moment you stop pretending, you start living. The moment you admit that something in your life no longer reflects who you are, you reclaim the power to change it. Honesty, though painful, is the purest form of freedom. Transformation also challenges the ego, the psychological structure that keeps our identity intact. The ego's job is to maintain continuity, to make sure you feel like the same you from yesterday. That's useful for functioning in the world, but it becomes a prison when you start evolving. The ego resists change because every transformation feels like a small death. It will whisper, you're not ready, you might fail, or people won't understand. And you have to learn to see those thoughts for what they are, defense mechanisms, not truth. One of the most powerful things you can do during self-transformation is to practice observation without judgment. Watch your own thoughts like clouds passing in the sky. Don't fight them. Don't believe all of them. Just notice. That awareness itself begins to weaken old patterns. The moment you can see your mind clearly, it loses its power to control you. Psychologists often talk about metacognition, thinking about your thinking. This skill is the cornerstone of transformation. When you can step back and say, this is my fear speaking, or that's my old conditioning reacting, you've already begun to break the spell. Awareness doesn't erase pain, but it changes your relationship to it. You stop drowning in emotions and start navigating them. You become the observer, not the storm. And from that observer state, something miraculous happens. You start noticing your own evolution in real time. You notice that arguments that once left you shattered now barely touch you. You notice that silence no longer feels empty, but peaceful. You notice that you no longer crave validation from people who never understood you in the first place. That's transformation made visible. But you can't skip the in-between. Between the old you and the new you lies the void, the space where you're no longer who you were, but not yet who you'll become. It's the most uncomfortable phase. It feels like limbo. You'll want to rush through it, to fill it with distractions or false certainty. Don't. That void is where the integration happens. It's where your subconscious begins to align with your conscious intentions. The seed doesn't sprout by fighting the soil. It grows in silence. Transformation also demands forgiveness of others, but mostly of yourself. You cannot step into a new life while dragging the weight of old guilt. Every version of you was doing the best it could with the awareness it had. That realization is not an excuse, it's compassion. You grow faster when you stop punishing yourself for not knowing what you know now. Growth begins the moment blame ends. Interestingly, research on emotional intelligence shows that self-compassion actually leads to higher discipline, not less. When you stop attacking yourself internally, your nervous system relaxes, freeing up energy for change. You begin to act from love rather than fear. That's why the most profound transformations often start quietly, with simple self-kindness. You don't need to shout affirmations into the mirror. You just need to stop speaking to yourself like an enemy. There's a deeper truth, too. Every act of self-transformation ripples outward. When you heal a pattern, you unconsciously give others permission to do the same. When you choose authenticity, you disrupt generations of conformity. In that sense, transformation is not personal, it's collective. You're not just changing your life, you're changing the emotional DNA of everyone connected to you. Your courage becomes contagious. But don't expect everyone to understand your transformation. People who benefited from your old self will often resist your new one. They'll say you've changed, as if that's a crime. They'll try to pull you back into roles that feel too small now. Let them. You don't owe anyone your stagnation. The ones meant for your next chapter will recognize you not by your sameness, but by your authenticity. At some point, you'll realize transformation isn't about reaching some perfect state. It's about living in alignment with truth, moment by moment. It's not about becoming someone else, but remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. That's the real work, to return to your essence, not your image. Psychologically, this process mirrors something called self-actualization, a term made famous by Abraham Maslow. It's the highest level of human development, the point where your actions flow naturally from your values, where creativity and authenticity replace imitation. Maslow found that self-actualized people aren't extraordinary by birth. They're simply those who've chosen honesty over comfort again and again. They've learned to follow inner truth even when it costs them approval. But transformation doesn't end with self-actualization. It evolves into self-transcendence. That's when your growth stops being about you and starts being about something greater. You begin to live in service, not out of obligation, but because it feels natural. You want to contribute, to uplift, to share what you've learned. Transformation completes itself when it becomes generosity. If you pay attention, you'll see signs of this everywhere. People who've gone through profound inner change often radiate a quiet strength. They no longer chase attention, yet their presence commands it. They've replaced arrogance with grounded confidence, ambition with purpose, and judgment with understanding. They've realized that power doesn't come from control, it comes from clarity. Clarity is what happens when you stop lying to yourself. It's what's left when the noise of comparison fades. You stop asking, am I ahead or behind? And start asking, am I aligned? That single shift changes everything, because alignment breeds peace, and peace, not excitement, is the real mark of transformation. But there's a final stage few talk about, the return. After the storm settles, after the ego dissolves, after the healing has begun, you return to ordinary life. The dishes still need washing, the bills still need paying. But you meet those ordinary moments differently. You bring awareness to them. You move through the world slower, softer, more awake. That's when you realize transformation was never about escaping life. It was about learning how to live it fully. It's easy to romanticize growth, to make it sound mystical and grand. But the truth is, transformation is mostly made of small, unglamorous choices. It's waking up 5 minutes earlier to meditate. It's forgiving someone who doesn't deserve it because you want peace more than pride. It's saying no when your heart whispers that something's wrong, even if your mind says it's easier to say yes. Every micro-choice builds the macro change. And then one day, quietly, without announcement, you notice something extraordinary. The things that used to break you now teach you. The fears that once ruled you now guide you. You look at the person you used to be with compassion instead of shame. That's when you know you've crossed the invisible line between who you were and who you were meant to become. Self-transformation isn't a destination. It's a relationship with life itself. It's saying, I am willing to keep evolving, even when it hurts. It's trusting that what feels like destruction is often creation in disguise. It's the willingness to be undone so something truer can emerge. And maybe that's the most beautiful part of all. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to stay open, because life has a strange way of transforming you exactly when you stop trying to control it. The deeper intelligence of growth knows where it's taking you. Your only job is to keep saying yes, to learning, to changing, to becoming. So if you're standing in the middle of your own transformation right now, confused, lost, uncertain, remember this: you are not broken, you are breaking open. The discomfort you feel isn't a sign of failure. It's the sound of your old limits cracking. You are shedding what no longer serves you so you can remember what's always been true. The real you was never gone. It was just waiting for your permission to return. And one day, when you look back, you'll smile at the person you once were, the one who was scared, uncertain, and tired, but who still took that first brave step into the unknown. Because that step, quiet as it was, changed everything. That was the moment you stopped existing and started becoming. That's the psychology of self-transformation, the science of change, the art of surrender, and the courage to be reborn again and again without needing applause. Growth isn't about becoming flawless. It's about becoming free. Free from illusion, from fear, from the weight of who you were told to be. And that freedom, gentle, grounded, and deeply earned, is what it truly means to transform.